We better get back, because it'll be dark soon, and they mostly come at night. Mostly.
Over almost 50 years, the lore and timeline of the Alien universe has been shaped and altered in fresh, exciting, and sometimes baffling ways. Naturally, what constitutes accepted canon within the franchise differs wildly from person to person. Some accept only a select few titles, others prefer to allow the studio to dictate canonicity, and others still push for a broader, shared continuity across fandoms. Perhaps the Alien canon deserves to be explored more as an evolving organism. That said, one title almost everyone agrees upon is the first sequel to Ridley Scott's classic, the 1986 follow-up, helmed by none other than James Cameron, Aliens. In this second part to our timeline companion guide to the Alien franchise, join me as we explore the evolving frontier of this incredible universe, and follow along as we slowly build out our timeline, one film at a time. Welcome to Geekritique. My name is Dakota. Today, I'll be your morally compromised corporate chronologist, sent straight from the company to mitigate any potential temporal anomalies we might stumble upon in our discussion of this film. If you like what you've seen in this series of videos so far, and hope to see more in the future, please be sure to give this a big thumbs up, share some kind words, and subscribe. The deeper we get into this series, the more I've uncovered, and we're barely getting started. In Part 1's discussion of the themes and lore of the first Alien flick, the biggest takeaway was the lack of any concrete answers, and in most cases, even names were omitted. Ridley Scott gave us a film where fear of the unknown was a palpable concept that permeated the entire work, creating a deep sense of unease in his viewers. Fox wanted a sequel to Alien after modest success, but Scott wasn't interested. After proving his salt with The Terminator, James Cameron's pitch for an Alien sequel was taken seriously, and he was given the green light to write and direct Aliens. Scott is a visual auteur and wasn't responsible for the original screenplay for Alien. That credit went to Dan O'Bannon, but Cameron was a different star beast entirely, writing the script on his own. The tonal shift from cosmic horror to military action thriller is absolutely worth studying because the genre change somehow doesn't ruin the continuity. It heightens it. Most notably, for our discussion today, it leaves much less in the way of mystery and intrigue than its predecessor, and provides much stronger boundaries within its lore and timeline for us to dive in on and pick apart. As I will do for every film in this series, I've made it a point to not just study the theatrical cut, but to also dive into the screenplays, read the novelizations if available, and to take notes on the special editions or alternate cuts that many of the films have. While the theatrical cut is the definitive version of the first film in the series, as the director's cut features alternate takes on scenes and concepts, the special edition cut of Aliens is widely agreed to be the definitive version of the second film. It doesn't omit any of the original scenes for alternate takes or screen length, but rather adds in deleted scenes that positively shape the boundaries of the entire canon, as we'll explore shortly. The last we saw of Ripley, she was expecting to be picked up by the network within a few weeks to a few months. But space isn't just a place where no one can hear you scream. It's an empty void that one can seemingly float endlessly in forever without detection. Ripley may have gotten herself out of the frying pan, but this film puts her right back into the fire. When Ripley is eventually picked up, nearly a whole lifetime has passed her by.
57 years. What? That's the thing, you were out there for 57 years.
Ripley's drift through the cosmos could have nearly been fatal for her. The novelization goes even further to suggest that no one had ever survived more than 65 years in hypersleep. Longer than that, and the body begins to fail.
What happened was you had drifted right through the core systems, and it's really just blind luck that a deep salvage team found you when they did. It's 1 in 1,000, really. I think you're damn lucky to be alive, kiddo. You could be floating out there forever.
57 is a very exact number, but unfortunately this film continues the trend of keeping the timeline of these films as vague as possible. However, I did mention in my last video how a one-off line in this film helps shape how the series would be dated by future titles, and I'll get back to that later. First, let's discuss some of the time frames the film gives us so we can better situate it. Ripley wakes up on Gateway Station after a few days of her being found.
You're safe. You're at Gateway Station, been here a couple of days.
Shortly thereafter, likely within a fortnight, the company brings her before a tribunal to answer for her destruction of the Nostromo 57 years ago. She is stripped of her rank as a warrant officer.
Now, no criminal charges will be filed against you at this time, and you are released on your own recognizance for a 6-month period of psychometric probation.
This means Ripley spends less than 6 months at Gateway Station, as she's allowed to waive her probation period if she joins Burke and the Colonial Marines to check on the colonists on LV-426. I expect she spent about 2 to 3 months on Gateway altogether. We know it needs to be at least a few months of unanswered calls from the colonists due to how long it takes for messages to send across space.
Because it takes 2 weeks to get an answer out here.
There seems to have also been huge leaps in faster-than-light travel, as it would have taken the Nostromo
10 months
to get from the Zeta 2 Reticuli star system to Earth, but it only takes the Sulaco 3 weeks to get from Earth to that system, according to the novelization. That makes the cruising speed of the Sulaco some 14.5 times faster than the Nostromo. If we set the distance of Zeta 2 Reticuli to 39.3 light-years from Earth, we can compare that to the warp speeds in the Star Trek universe. The US CSS Nostromo would be moving at warp 3.25, while the USS Sulaco would be at warp 7. Extremely impressive for the proposed century Alien takes place in, but more on that later. Cameron loves family-oriented dramas, and he explores that in meaningful ways in every film he's ever put to the screen. Aliens is no different. He saw the seeds that Scott planted in Alien for themes of motherhood and allowed for them to grow in unique ways for his sequel, Aliens. The largest tragedy of Ripley's 57-year hypersleep sojourn is that she lost an entire lifetime away from her child. Criminally absent in the theatrical cut of the film, we learn only in the special edition that Ripley was a mother to a young girl.
Is there any word about my daughter?
Amanda Ripley McLaren, married name, I guess, age 66. And that was at the time of her death, which was 2 years ago.
Before you ask, I tried making sense of the on-screen dates featured on this graphic, but alas, they're meaningless, as are all the on-screen dates in the film.
I promised her that I would be home for her birthday. Her 11th birthday.
The tragedy isn't solely that Ripley had lost a child, but that a child had lost a parent who promised to be there, a promise now fully rendered moot. Not only had the alien aboard the Nostromo taken the lives of her crewmates, it had effectively taken her daughter. When Ripley later finds Rebecca Jordan, or as the girl likes to be called, Newt, she takes parental control over the child, being present for Newt in a way she no longer could for Amanda. The novelization helps bridge their eventual relationship by having Newt suggest that she could replace Ripley's daughter if she'll have her, and by the film's resolution, Newt lovingly calls her Mommy. Cameron takes this theme of motherhood and then twists it into something grotesque. Newt asks if the alien that grows inside the host is similar to the way that a human baby grows.
Isn't that how babies come? I mean, people babies, they go inside you.
That's very different.
But despite Ripley's denial here, note the change in the way she understands the alien's reproductive cycle. Instead of implanted or parasitized, she describes the process as
Impregnated. Whatever you call it.
This one word is a drastic shift for the franchise that ripples its way throughout nearly every future film. But Aliens goes one step further by delivering us Ripley's foil in Motherhood, the Alien Queen, whose maternal instincts for her brood rival that of our protagonist's protection for her surrogate daughter. The Queen is a seismic lore shift away from how the Alien director's cut explained their reproductive cycle.
But each one of these things comes from an egg, right? So who's laying these eggs?
Instead of a single alien being able to metamorphose living bodies to become eggs, a queen is now required to produce them, and the hosts are kept alive to bear the impregnated seeds. This separates the alien population roles by designating a difference between drones and queens. By only the second film, we're already seeing the first hints of potential retconning taking shape, but as I'll explore in the next part of this video series, both reproductive cycles can be made to work in tandem, thanks to some clever writing. Along with the new boundaries to the alien's reproductive cycle, we also get some useful names for the aliens in question.
All we know is that there's still no contact with the colony, and that a xenomorph may be involved.
This line baffled me for some time, as it implies the company has met these creatures previously and has since designated them as xenomorphs. This term is repeated in the scripts for the film as well as the novelization, but it's never explained how they knew what kind of creature it was based solely off of Ripley's descriptions. Unless the term xenomorph was meant to be no more than a catch-all term like insect, bird, or mammal. This was eventually answered almost 30 years later in the 2014 tie-in novel Sea of Sorrows. The species' true designation of Xenomorph XX121 was first catalogued. The term facehugger also makes its way into alien lore with this film. Despite the phrase never being included in either cut of the movie, it appears in the screenplay as a descriptor, and the novelization locks it into canon. The Xenomorphs weren't the only corners of this universe to get a significant lore boost with James Cameron's sequel. The company, previously known as Weyland-Yutani, has gone through some big changes. For one, this film adds the letter D in Weyland, and changes their logo from the classic winged sun emblem to the more stylized commercial WY branding, something you'd likely see on the sides of trucks or shipping crates. And that branding can be seen everywhere, from space heaters to children's tricycles.
You know, we manufacture those, by the way.
No longer the faceless entity behind human greed, we're greeted early on to the kindly face of the Weyland-Yutani corporate lackey, Carter Burke, whom we too slowly realize is just as dangerous as the company itself, willing to backstab and sacrifice the lives of colonists, Marines, and anyone else if it means financial gain is involved. The company is apparently above governmental law by this time, as they handle legal matters entirely in-house, and have vastly expanded the scope and scale of their businesses. Notice their new motto, building better worlds. They're now deeply engaged in terraforming efforts that take decades and centuries to turn a profit, an endeavor that would only be taken on if the company had existed in some form for a very long time, or had the understanding they'd be around forever. The novelization claims, the company was immortal, as none of them could ever be. One of my favorite aspects about this second film is its approach to universe building. Of the 300 planets surveyed for eventual colonization, we learn that the world the Nostromo visited in the Zeta II Reticuli system 57 years ago has now been host to colonists for decades.
There have been people there for over 20 years, and they never complained about any hostile organism.
What do you mean?
This planetoid had been designated LV-426 by the company, but the colonists called the moon Acheron. The primary colonist base, Hadley's Hope, boasted a population of 158 before the xenomorph infestation. The film never calls the planetoid Acheron, however. That remains true only for the novelization and screenplay. But names we do get in film, like LV-426 and Hadley's Hope, feel earned after the heart-pounding emptiness of the first film's approach to world-building. To aid these colonists along safely, a new military branch has seemingly been created, the corporate-aligned Colonial Marines. What may in hindsight seem like a natural fit for the alien universe is actually quite ingenious. If a bunch of truckers in space aboard the Nostromo can't handle a single alien, how well will a whole platoon of soldiers armed to the teeth fare against dozens of them? While this film scales back the horror in favor of action, Cameron shows us just how truly dangerous these creatures are as they pick off the platoon one by one. While not as strong a through line as the theme of family in his films, Cameron's love for the Marines, or military analogs, seems to have jump-started here, and has made its way to even his most recent films.
Remember, kid, a Marine can't be defeated. Oh, you can kill us, but we'll just regroup in hell. Semper Fi.
The Colonial Marines operate as not only interplanetary police, but as exterminators of potentially hazardous fauna.
Is this gonna be a stand-up fight, sir, or another bug hunt?
While the novelization for the first Alien film merely hints at the fact that humanity had encountered alien life before, this line in the second film confirms it, and pushes the narrative that these Marines are often put in positions that require them to take offensive action in favor of the colonists' livelihood. Following the naming conventions introduced for the ships in the first film, wherein the Nostromo and the Narcissus are both apt references to the works of Joseph Conrad, Cameron names the Colonial Marines ship after a port town in one of his works, Sulaco. In Conrad's novel, The Nostromo, Sulaco is where imperialist powers and corporate greed come together to exploit silver mines. This thematically follows in the same vein, as the Colonial Marines are the on-call firepower wielded by the company, Weyland-Yutani. The name Acheron, while not from a Conrad title, is an Easter egg which stems from Greek mythology and was later cemented into the literary canon with Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. Acheron is one of the 5 rivers that take you to the underworld, and it translates to River of Sorrows. It's a shame that such a fitting name for a world that carries perhaps the most dangerous organisms to ever populate the cosmos goes unspoken or abandoned in the final film. Those who towards Acheron do not descend. Speaking about not descending, I think it's about time this conversation does descend into some of the murkier, extra-universal Easter eggs that this film subtly alludes to. When scrolling through some of Ripley's old crew aboard the Nostromo during her board of inquiry, the screen featuring Captain Dallas claims he previously worked for the Tyrell Corporation. This is a fun little nod to another Ridley Scott film, Blade Runner, whose Tyrell Corporation was responsible for the production of the replicants, or the synthetics of that universe. While the Blade Runner and Alien universes could technically be one and the same, and I don't begrudge anyone who feels that they are, I don't see any connective or thematic value in meshing the two together. I view it as no more than an Easter egg. Connecting the two does both franchises a disservice. It would weaken Blade Runner's philosophical debate on whether androids dream of electric sheep, and the timeline of Alien would suffer as the replicants both predate and outperform the synthetics. Another Easter egg I found during my study can only be found in Cameron's first draft of the Alien script. When speaking about Ash, the robot synthetic Ripley encountered aboard the Nostromo, the script claims his make was Cyberdyne Systems, a blatant nod to Cameron's previous film, The Terminator. In that universe, Cyberdyne Systems was eventually responsible for creating Skynet. But the final script and film removed the Easter egg in favor of the in-universe name Hyperdyne.
Yeah, the Hyperdyne System's 128 too.
So that's an easier Easter egg to discard. Aliens goes a long way to help world build the need for synthetics in this universe and flips how the audience is intended to view them. With Ash, we knew he was the embodiment of the company in the first film, coldly ambivalent to anyone's plight, save for his creators.
It's a robot! Ash is a goddamn robot!
The sequel doesn't use the term robot at all, and instead uses more standard sci-fi terms like android and synthetic.
I prefer the term artificial person myself.
Even though synthetic becomes this universe's official term for these artificial beings, Bishop's response here is truly unique, as it not only shows his personality, but the ability to be hurt by the stigmatization of his race. It's funny though that they removed the word robot from the film, but then have Bishop invoke Asimov's first law of robotics.
It is impossible for me to harm or by mission of action allow to be harmed a human being.
Cameron replaces Ash's cold indifference with Bishop's warmth, just as he replaced Scott's existential horror for action and empathy. While this film doesn't answer one of my big questions from the first film, particularly what a xenomorph would do when confronted with a synthetic, the novelization does explore Bishop's thoughts on what would happen if a facehugger implanted him with its offspring. Ultimately, the xenomorphs ignore the synthetic's ministrations entirely, perhaps sensing him as unviable for reproduction. One thing I hope to get across throughout the course of this Timeline Companion series is the notion that canon isn't just a box of what's accepted and what isn't, especially when it comes to the Alien franchise. I'm treating canon, as it shifts with each entry, as a living, changing, evolving organism, much like the eponymous aliens themselves. Even when concepts are seemingly abandoned or retconned, it's not uncommon for future titles to explore them in unique new ways. As I'm writing this essay, the entirety of the first season of Alien Earth has been released, and I've only seen the first episode, but that's enough for me to realize that certain abandoned concepts have been subtly repurposed for that series. It's my belief that someone in the writing staff, perhaps even Noah Hawley himself, read Alan Dean Foster's novelization of Aliens and adopted certain ideas for the new series. The ship that crashes into Earth in the first episode claims that its mission length was 65 years, and what did the novelization claim? No one had ever survived more than 65 years in hypersleep. That was my first head-scratcher, something I chalked up to coincidence. But then later in the novel, Spunkmeyer thinks of Bishop as a funny sort of hybrid. The term is strange, and the narration is never revisited, but it's enough to make you wonder. It's the only time a synthetic is ever referred to as a hybrid in the entire Alien canon. That is, until Alien Earth, which redefines what a hybrid is. Another curious parallel. Lastly, there's this passage in the novelization that the final film omits, which startlingly sounds like it could have been the germination of the idea for the actual show. Nobody's ever encountered anything like them. You think it'd be dangerous for some germs to get loose from a weapons lab? Try to imagine what would happen if just one of those parasites got loose in a major city, with its thousands of kilometers of sewers and pipes and glass fiber channels to hide in. I don't know about you, but this sounds a lot like the premise of the show. If these parallels are totally coincidental, I still find it fascinating how the canon takes genetic strands from previous titles and mutates them into something ever-changing. One thing I'm pleased they decided to change with Aliens involves Ripley herself. Her first name is never spoken or hinted at in the first film, and the theatrical cut of Aliens only ever calls her
Warrant Officer E. Ripley.
Only at the tail end of the special edition do we finally learn her first name, before she goes back into the fire to save Newt.
See you, Hicks.
Dwayne. It's Dwayne.
Ellen.
It is perhaps the most earned first name reveal in all of cinema history.
Don't be gone long, Ellen.
For nearly 2 whole films, she's been known solely by her surname, effectively making her just another cog in the corporate machine. But now that she's broken free of her corporate restraints, she can finally reclaim her humanity, her personhood. It's important to note here that the novelization calls her Ellen several times, as does the final script, but Cameron chose to keep that reveal at the very end, which was a brilliant call. However, reserving it for the special edition alone was a criminal misjudgment in the editing room. I mentioned in my previous video that the first time we get proper dates for this universe was 16 years after the original aired, in the Aliens Colonial Marines technical manual, and that it used the date in the first film with logic from the second to make sense of it.
I just checked the colony log. Directive dated 6/12/79, signed Burke, Carter J. You sent them out there and you didn't even warn them.
Directive 6/12/79 may not have originally been a date, but it's been co-opted as one. And the author of that technical manual, Lee Brimacombe Wood, decided that the 22nd century appeared to fit best for this universe. So this means that after Ripley's interrogation about what her crew found on LV-426, Burke sent out a directive on June 12, 2179 to go investigate the derelict alien vessel, effectively decimating the colony. Circa 2 months later, based on travel times and subspace messaging delays, places the main events of Aliens at the tail end of summer 2179, likely in August, by my reckoning. Subtract 57 years from that, and that gives us the year of our first film, in 2122. But was the 22nd century the intended century setting these films were initially supposed to occur in? I personally have my doubts, but we'll cover that in our next video. After Ripley, Hicks, Newt, and Bishop make it off Acheron, they nuke the site, defeat the Xenomorph Queen, and place themselves in hypersleep aboard the Sulaco for their return journey to Earth. I'm sure nothing could go wrong. If you're enjoying my coverage of the Alien franchise throughout this timeline companion, please be sure to check out my podcast, Project Geekology, as we've been discussing our way through the Alien films. We've got over 135 episodes for you to listen to now, covering just about everything, so click the link in the description if you're interested in more of my musings. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more. How am I doing? Are these videos valuable companion guides for the lore, timeline, and canon of the Alien franchise? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks guys. Long live the timeline.